Hi, intro students. I wanted to just briefly give a little bit of my thoughts around the Derek Matravers definition of art. And um, the reason I really like that podcast episode is that it's generated by philosophers. So one of the things that is really interesting to me is this idea of accountability. And so there being a discipline that is invested in some of the same ideas and thoughts as art, but is maybe not holding art accountable to some of the ways that it's operating or defining things, and having that kind of external sphere, source, or discipline that can kind of poke and prod at our notions and definitions in terms of art and artworks and what they do, or in the way that Derek Matravers in that conversation really plays out is this idea of reasons, right? Is art giving us good enough reason to care about it? And one of the things I usually think of is our kind of limited amount of time on Earth, or to be alive, right? And when I think about that, I think about how many maybe weekday evenings or how many weekends do I still have left before I, as an average, my life expectancy or my lifespan is over. And when you think, without being too dark about that, how many of those free moments or of those moments where I might have choice am I going to choose to go and look at or take in art? And is or are the people who are generating or producing that kind of culture, are they giving us good enough reasons to care about what it is they're presenting or what it is they're trying to say? And so it's a really good question, right? Especially if many of us feel somewhat baffled or maybe left out of what art is trying to do, mainly because of either a lack of education, which I don't necessarily always like to hinge on that, but sometimes it is meaningful, or just a lack of exposure, or other spheres or cultural facets of our lives having an investment in caring about art or art history as well, in order to properly represent it or put forward some ways of understanding it. Okay, so I'm coming back to these images because I didn't really lay out what I did in conversation, but I didn't really lay out specifically. And I think they're generic, but they're pulled from this idea of what makes something art and it going through a process. So this artist makes an artifact, right? A painting, sculpture, photography, those are things that we kind of have adopted or categorized as art media, and those mediums are delineated because they individually have a set of concerns and things that they're invested in figuring out that are medium specific. So not that there's an overlap, but sculpture is dealing, for example, in the round and has this kind of spatial issue, whereas painting is often flat and two-dimensional, and so is photography. But then you get performance, which deals with time, right? So you get in this 4D space where things happen over time, and then there's a variety of overlap and mixture. So we get installations that might have all these components. But an artist makes this thing, this artifact, and puts it forward in the world and says, I'm an artist and I made this artwork and I want you to appreciate it as a candidate, right? A candidate for appreciation. And that link that's created, that's kind of that Duchamp link, that is contestable, but is still a link. Jeez, sorry. It's really hard to escape my family sounds right now, so just ignore that. Anyway, so it starts that process and enters into what is kind of a collective art world. This art world is a construct that we've made up with those acting on behalf of this kind of historic tradition of art. And I think Derek Matravers does a good job of laying this out, so galleries, museums, academies, etc. Then there's a viewer, right? An audience, so a spectator. As a viewer, you can interact with the art as a mediated experience. And if you don't understand that term, the mediated experience is, imagine like a television show, right? You're watching maybe a news broadcast of a tornado, and you're not experiencing the tornado itself. You have this mediated experience through this. Okay, I'm going to try to resume where I just got cut off. I got invaded by my family. Now, it as this kind of spectator, that kind of mediated experience I was talking about. Historically, there was a lot of belief that you could go and look at something and not be complicit or drawn into the thing itself. So it was like you were looking at it in a very neutral way. We'll talk a lot about how that starts to shift in this really interesting way, but this idea of there being a dialogue between the viewer and the object is something that's pretty critical, right, to the work. Being artwork, but being seen, right? So what I was just saying is that at some point, the artwork will start to ask you to see yourself seeing, and that's a really, really fun moment that we'll have some really good conversations about, I hope. But when we shift from this, right, and try to decipher a definition and these kind of reasons, a viewer comes to the artwork with expectations. So if we don't have our expectations met, it's a good indicator that there's something we should question, okay? And that's going to be a little bit of a vague statement, but I think when you looked at Maurizio Catalan's Banana Duct Tape to the Wall, Comedian, or if you looked at the Untitled piece by Tom Friedman of that squiggle on the paper, and your expectations weren't met, so you were confronted and you had a reaction, maybe even defensive reaction to it, that's usually, at least current day, a good sign that you should be questioning not only it, but yourself, right? And that interesting thing, we'll call that a relational response. Artists often work with concepts or ideas in which they bring together ideas that are often seen as unrelated, right, in an attempt to say something new. And I think, like we talked about in our first lecture, that can be really unsteady ground to be standing on. So this idea, though, this concept I didn't make up, it's a term of aboutness that is tethered to philosophy. Artists put their ideas through a process of making materially and conceptually. For instance, they may make a drawing, and that drawing is a drawing, like Tom Friedman's, but it's also about something else. Okay, and it's worth noting that I think maybe art is the only thing that really does this, right? And that's what sets it apart from other spheres. So all of this obviously is in hope of communication of some sort. So again, as a viewer, you interact with the artwork in this mediated experience, and the artwork has been through a process that the viewer can then dialogue without the artist being present, right? And so the critical thing, though, that we're going to tease out too is where that art lies, or where's the art happening. It's really fun to think about it not residing in the object itself, but residing in us or in the world. Right? And so there will be some really cool artworks that will kind of throw those the expectations into the mix, and really attack our expectations of what we think art should be or art should be doing. Now, Derek Matravers, though, like I said earlier in this, is really invested in whether or not, even though all this is happening, that art is giving us good enough reason to care about it. Is it addressing, or is it significant in terms of the other larger or interesting things going on in the world today? Okay. Wow, tons of interruptions today. I hope that helps.